guys, and welcome to a bonus video focused on Sanji and some things that we should bring to light after chapter 845. Now that chapter came out yesterday, and when I did my review I was very skeptical about my own opinions, as you might have noticed from how I did the review. But after having read through your comments, I realized that I might not have been as insane as I originally thought. And after I kind of read a couple of your reviews, I kind of just zoned out for an hour, listened to some calming music, and just started thinking about how it is that Sanji had been acting throughout this arc. And I will point out, I have not seen anyone's opinion except for the people who commented on my two videos. I have not seen any reviews, I have not read the comment section on any reviews, I have not been on any forums, I have done nothing. I have just seen your comments and I've had my own views on this. But what I started thinking about, as I have told people who asked about this, I have been thinking about how Sanji is acting and how it is that it seems like Sanji is acting just a little bit, maybe not out of character, but just a little strangely. And that's what I want to dive into. First I'm gonna set the stage for this theory-ish video by making 2 points. One about Sanji's character and one about the story. So let's just get started before I kind of just talk about nothing. So the first point I want to make is about Sanji's character and how throughout the series one of Sanji's main character traits has become that he is a smart character who thinks ahead. And while he is also a very strong fighter, most of the time what really takes his character and what really helps the Straw Hats is when Sanji thinks ahead and does things that'll fuck things up for their enemies further down the road. We see this in Little Garden, Alabasta, Skypiea, Water 7, and East Lobby. We also have that line from Sanji, which I don't remember correctly, but it's something along the lines of sometimes you don't win by being strong, sometimes you win by thinking ahead. It's something he says when he fucked up the things at Enies Lobby with the Gates of Justice. So let's just establish from now on, Sanji is smart and thinks ahead. The next important thing is that Sanji was present both at Arlong Park and Enies Lobby. And if you've been following my videos for a while, you know that I have a big problem with comparing this arc too much to Arlong Park and Enies Lobby, because I think that it's kind of a it kind of belittles this arc if you keep comparing them to these other character arcs. I see why though, because there are definitely parallels, but I do think that this is vastly different and we should take that into account. But what we can take from this is that Sanji was present at both events, and he knows that unless you actually really want to leave the crew, and leaving the crew will not result in your life getting worse, you can't leave. Examples of this are of course Nami, Usopp, and Robin, who all came back because the Straw Hats was the better place for them, and Vivi, who stayed back in Alabasta because she was a princess and she loved her people and her life would literally not be worse if she stayed there. And I think also comparing this arc too much to Enies Lobby and Arlong Park is kind of us falling into a trap that Oda might just be laying out for us. Because if we think that Sanji will be saved by Luffy, I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Especially after 844, where I did argue a lot for the fact that, of course, Luffy won't save Sanji, there's no way now. He just said that he wouldn't be moving from his spot, putting his faith in Sanji and his strength. So, it would be weird if this arc were to end with Sanji not really saving himself. I mean, I am not against him getting help because he is up against some really tough dudes, but ultimately, Sanji needs to save himself in this arc. To further support that this is the year of Sanji, it came from Oda himself, and I doubt that he would have said something like that if he had not planned something really, really big for Sanji's character and his character development and just character moments in general. And while I did say in my review that I do not think that Oda would pull off something like a crazy master plan that Sanji had just been planning all along, I will take that statement back, because if there's anyone who could pull it off, it's Oda. He's a really good writer. And the thing is, Oda does like to play without expectations. So I wouldn't really put it past him. So yeah, and that is what I'm gonna argue for in this video. So let's just get completely into it. I have 6 main points as to why I think Sanji might not be showing completely what he feels and thinks, and that how he's acting is all setting up something bigger. something that will allow him to get out of this really, really shit situation. So let's start with number one. My number one reason is that Sanji went off on his own to stop the marriage. Already there, he was prepared to take on this task by himself. Of course, at this point, he did not know exactly what the stakes were. He didn't know about the hostage situation, presumably. And he probably didn't know how exactly he would react to seeing the Veen smokes again and all that stuff. So, of course, at this point there were unknown factors, but it is important to remember that from that moment on, Sanji had already put it in his mind that he wanted to get out of the situation himself, and he did say that he would come back. Of course, you can argue for whether or not he was lying, but I personally think that he would have tried his best to get back. But what's really interesting about when Sanji left So is that when he did so, we saw that he started thinking ahead, which is exactly what I'm of course arguing for that he's doing at the moment. And I remember so clearly when this chapter came out, I think it was 816, when Sanji, he pushed Nami and the others away, he took Caesar hostage, and he basically just owned everything despite him being the prisoner. I remember how the fandom was just kind of cheering because this is a side of Sanji we've all been waiting to see for a long, long time. Sanji being smart, Sanji being badass, Sanji just being really fucking awesome. And the thing is, in this moment Sanji did a lot of things that I just mentioned. He saved his friends, he made sure that they couldn't be used against him, he used Caesar as a hostage to gain control over Capone because of course if Caesar died, Big Mom wouldn't really be happy with him, and he understood that in this situation, even though he was a prisoner, he could not get hurt because they made the stupid mistake of revealing that he was wanted only alive. So already from there, Sanji had a lot of freedom because he had a hostage and he had a situation where he couldn't die no matter what he did. And the thing about this is, we did not see what Sanji was up to from the moment he left So to the moment a week after where he's on Big Mom's ship. And I will bet you anything that Sanji did not just sit around doing nothing. He was thinking, he was calculating his next move, he was observing his enemy. 100% that was what he did. Point number two, calm and collected. So through this arc, Sanji has shown emotion, but he hasn't shown all that much emotion. Like, forgetting the previous chapter where of course he had a breakdown and cried, he's been weirdly calm. And the reason that I'm pointing this out, because some of you might be like, well, he did a couple of things, which I will get into. I remember when I was going through various forums and just like comment sections and stuff like that, a lot of people were like, isn't that weird that Sanji is acting this way? Isn't that weird that he's so calm considering everything around him? Because there are just times where Sanji just looks like he doesn't give a shit. And I sometimes find that really interesting because, yes, as I said, he's cool, he's calm and collected, that's kind of like the basis of him, but he's also very, very quick to show emotion sometimes. And I'm gonna point out the 4 situations in which Sanji showed emotion and how that played to his benefit, whether it was by accident, as I think some of them were, or whether it was something he deliberately did to throw the Veen smokes off. So the first thing I want to point your attention to is that Sanji showed emotion, probably for the first time to Reiju, I believe, when he was given the handcuffs, or she put the handcuffs on him, and he panicked when they put them on him, and he also, like, we have that really sad balcony scene where he kind of just breaks down, thinks about Seth, how he's not supposed to hurt his hands, and then breaks down even though neither Reiju or Judge are in the room. And of course this is a groundbreaking moment for Sanji because he probably never expected that his hands would be taken hostage, if I can say it in that way. Like, that was probably not a part of his calculations. So yeah, it would make sense for Sanji to break down over this, but it's important to note that with Sanji breaking down over a thing like this, the Veen smokes believe that they have a lot of control over him because they have taken his prisoner's hands, and if he does something against them, they'll blow up. And for the Veen smokes right now, they don't give a crap about Sanji. All they want to do is to make sure that Sanji goes through with this wedding, and having complete control over him is their absolute goal in this. Second time Sanji shows emotion is when Ijiji and Niji arrive. And again, it is important here to note that Sanji is alone at this moment, and he doesn't show any sort of emotion when we see them interact when they are having breakfast. And while I do think that his reaction here was genuine because he does have really bad history with the Vinsmokes, it's also just important to remember that he has been able to suppress this fear and keep this calm and collected ulterior? I don't know. In the face of the Vinsmokes. And again, I think this is a calculated move because just seeing them and if just seeing them makes him break down, it doesn't really come off as something strong when he breaks down when something really big happens. So it's important for Sanji, of course, to keep his composure. However, we do have Sanji showing emotion during the breakfast, but that is for something entirely different, and that is when his morals are tested, because Nietzsche does the two things that Sanji is very much against: wasting food, hurting women. And Sanji showing his morals here is also very important because, first of all, it defines him as a character. It's a very important character moment for him to stand up to women, to eat food off the floor so that it won't be wasted. And having Sanji act on morals is again another thing where the Vinsmokes will be like, well, we can control you this way because you have a heart. And of course, Nietzsche takes advantage of this by being set up, and this in turn makes them, it leads Sanji to the lab where they eventually beat him up. Last time Sanji shows emotion is, of course, when he has to fight Luffy and beat him to a pulp. And this is the most important scene because this is what makes the Vinsmoke completely sure that Sanji won't act against him, because he literally just acted against his captain despite him not wanting to. I had said in my review of last chapter that I was confident in the fact that I think that the Vinsmokes know that Sanji's lying. I do not believe there's anyone who in that situation thought that Sanji would actually prefer marrying Pudding if he could choose between marrying her and going back to his crew. But the fact is, as long as the Vinsmokes think that they have complete control over Sanji, they will always underestimate him. And I think that's kind of what Sanji's going for here, because while Sanji was very obviously lying, and even Luffy was like, that's the worst lie I've ever heard, Sanji is a better liar than that, is he not? Because I will argue for the fact that I think that he lied a bit to Pudding in the end of chapter 845, and because of all the things that we've seen, it's a bit harder to detect those lies because of what Sanji did here and how bad of a liar he seemed to be in the face of Luffy. Which again is a smart move, because if they think that he's a bad liar, they won't suspect anything. Point number 3, women. I have said for a long time now that I don't really trust Reiju, and while this is not really about her, my first point in the women category is that Sanji is weirdly dismissive of Reiju. And I remember in chapter, must have been 835 or something. It's the chapter where Sanji fights Judge and Reiju then puts the handcuffs on him. And we have this scene where we see Reiju taking care of an injured Sanji like she did when they were children. But what I always found so interesting about this panel is the way that Sanji treats her, because when they were children, he let her help, and you'd think that after coming back to the Vinsmokes, he wouldn't be all that dismissive of her because she was actually nice to him when they were children. Yet he tells her off a couple of times throughout the whole Cake Island, and when Reiju helps her, he helps him here, he seems to be shifting away from her. So I think that there's something there at the very least. Of course, he does not really hide the fact that he does treat women differently and stuff like that, but I still think it's interesting how he doesn't get too close to any of the Vinsmokes. Another thing I want to point out, and this is something that I have been seeing for a long time, is that prior to 845, Sanji never said Pudding's name. He always referred to her as that girl. And I have been saying, I think once, I think I said this once, I think he does this to distance himself from her as much as possible, because he's of course against this marriage, and by not referring to her by name, the idea of marriage it's kind of far away. And he is a gentleman, so of course he wouldn't want to give Pudding false hope, or at least up until now. And I just in general find it interesting how he's been talking about putting through all this, except for of course in 845. What's also interesting to point out, I think, is that ever since Sanji got the handcuffs, he has not done his hard eyes. He did not do them for Pudding, he did not do them for Nami, he has not done them for anyone since they put on the handcuffs. And I think that's again Sanji thinking, because at the moment where he got the handcuffs on, he knew that the situation just got even worse, and he might just be thinking even more than usual, which just means that he does not have time to fangirl over all these women. There's just no time for that. He needs to think, he needs a clear mind, and he can't do that if he's just all over the girls. Point number 4 is information. As I said, Sanji has been very calm and collected throughout all of this, and what's also important to note is that he has been very silent most of the time, and that the information that he gives is very selective, and he doesn't really tell us anything new. Sanji speaks up when it comes to morals, when it comes to how he doesn't want to marry Pudding, and how much he hates the Beansmokes. But apart from that, he doesn't really say anything, and I just find that really interesting because, again, Sanji has a fiery temperament and he could easily just say something that he shouldn't, but he keeps his mouth shut at a lot of things. Like even when they threatened Seth, he was very silent. And of course, yes, this could come from shock, but then again, really? And what's then important to remember is that the 2 times where we see Sanji speak the most is in chapter 843 and 844, where Luffy obviously lies to Luffy, and I've already talked about how this is important because it makes it seem like the Beansmokes have control over him, despite everyone knowing that he'd rather travel with Luffy and be a shahad. And of course the ending of chapter 845, where he talks a lot to Pudding. And of course this is all leading up to the fact that I believe that he is lying to her. And I pointed a lot of these things out in my review, but I'm just gonna repeat a few of these things in case you don't remember, and in case I just need to reconfirm why I think these things. Because I found it, at first glance, the first thing that I just found off about 845, the ending there, was just that Sanji, for me, went a little bit too far in how he tried to make Pudding feel sympathetic towards him. He gave her the story of how he'd been living in hell for the first 7 years of his life, 8 I think, and then how in 13 years he got to be happy and now he's basically back in that hell, and he shows his face, tells him this is what my family really thinks of me, my family, and he basically just says that, well, this marriage isn't really gonna be good for me because Pudding picks up on the fact that, okay, so this is really gonna be awful for you. And Sanji did also say that, well, I tried to, like, go through my options and I wanted to go back, but I just came out with nothing, and now I just have to go through with this even though I don't want to. I have to end my adventures. And isn't that a bit much to spring on a girl? I mean, yeah. On top of that, he basically gives up in this chapter. Like, he says this straight out, I have stopped struggling, I'm just gonna go with the flow. And the thing is, as many people have pointed out, not only is this room full of mirrors, but we also have Nitro the Jello and Arabian the Carpet. This conversation is not private, and I think Sanji might be aware of this. While he might not know about the mirror thing, I think he has at this point figured out that these homies are not natural creatures and they do report to Big Mom. And by sincerely saying that he'd like to marry Pudding, like he basically proposes to her in the last panel there, they will obviously think that he has completely submitted to their will, especially because he says it in a situation that is supposed to be between him and a girl who just said that she would help him get out of the marriage if he wanted her to help. My 5th point is strength, and I think this is actually the most important point, because there is no doubt that we have not seen what Sanji is fully capable of yet. Every single one have noticed that Sanji is definitely holding back. He has not shown his full strength at any point in this arc, or at any point, I believe, in the New World, or just post-time skip in general. So what I'm going to argue here is how we can see exactly how it is that Sanji is holding back. Because in the fight against Judge, Sanji loses and he uses Diablo Jump and he does a lot of things, but he doesn't really get hurt. And what I noticed is that I feel like, because I did reread this chapter before I did this, it seems like Sanji more than anything just wanted to provoke Judge into coming at him at full force, so that Judge would show what he was capable of, but Sanji wouldn't. And again, something that would catch him off guard. Sanji also submitted himself to his siblings by letting them beat him up. Even though he had beaten up Yonji, he probably just wanted to let them know he's not that weak, but he's also not strong enough to take all of them on, because that's really important. Because if he just let himself get beat up all the time, it could be suspicious. But by having both won and lost, they can put him in some sort of like in a box. They can be like, okay, so you're stronger than this, but you're definitely not stronger than this. And that's important because if they think they have a power level on him, they know how to deal with him. And of course, Sanji hasn't shown what he's capable of yet, so they don't actually know his real power level. What's also interesting is that in the fight against Luffy, he only used techniques that are either very simple or techniques he had already used against Judge, such as the Diablo Jump, just in general setting fire to his leg and doing stuff like that. Like everything he did against Luffy, he'd already shown Judge, so he did nothing new there. So again, there is no point in Sanji holding back if he has not been planning for him to go all out at some point. Last point I want to make is foreshadowing. If we go back to Fishman Island, there was a whole lot of foreshadowing for this arc in the end, where Luffy obviously declares war against Big Mom. Congrats, Luffy. We meet Pudding for the first time, we meet Bobbin for the first time, we see Pudding's third eye, which I will go into in my other video, which you've probably seen is also uploaded. And we have a small notion from Sanji thinking about Big Mom, how she likes sweets and how he can make sweets, therefore she will like him. How many of you think that Sanji at some point will cook for Big Mom? Because I have been of that opinion for a long time, that at some point Sanji must use those cooking skills of him. I mean, it's the perfect opportunity. He's a chef, she likes sweets. Why not try to gain her trust and try to, I don't know, make sweets in exchange for these stupid keys to the handcuffs? Like, why not? And maybe that's going a bit too far, but he could still like sweeten up to her and do something that will make her like him. Another thing that's important to remember is that this, of course, this arc has been having a lot of themes centered around Alice in Wonderland. Everyone has said this, everyone knows this. And one of the central points in Alice in Wonderland is just that nothing is as it seems. There's always something beneath the surface. There's something that doesn't really make sense. You can't just look at things and then be like, well, this is how it is. There's always something more. And just in general, just looking at this arc, that's what we have. Seducing Woods, we have all of these nice things, and in reality it was just a trap to lure the Straw Hats in and kill them. Everything looks like rainbows and unicorns, when in reality it's a murder house. So I think that from just seeing what Sanji has been doing, how the story should continue to make Sanji's character arc shine, and how the theme of this arc has just been so clear in just like in the fact that we shouldn't trust anything, I think that believing that Sanji is thinking ahead, that he's not being sincere in what he told to Pudding, is a very great possibility. Because is it not odd? It is, because I know a lot of you agree with me in saying that, well, Sanji is acting a bit odd here, because there's just something off about the way he treated Pudding. There's something off in the way he talked about everything. There's something off in literally everything, and we've all pointed out multiple times before, Sanji has been holding back his strength the entire time. Why? So I think that was basically what I had to say about this. If you liked anything, you can leave a thumbs up on the video, leave in the comments below what you thought of this idea. And you can subscribe if you want to see more. I also do reviews of One Piece, Shokugeki no Soma, Haikyuu, Boku no Hero Academia, and I do weekly videos on One Piece the anime and Haikyuu the anime. So if you're into those, you can subscribe, and until next time, bye!